Welcome to Real Life Stories. Today, we're diving deep into the epic tale of the Hobbit, from the rise of Erebor to its fiery downfall under Smaug, and Bilbo's unforgettable adventure. Let's explore the world of Middle-earth together. A long time ago in Middle-earth, the city of Dale laid in front of the kingdom of Erebor ruled by King Thor. This kingdom was set under the Lonely Mountain, where the dwarves could mine for great amounts of jewels and gold. One day, they found a very rare gem called the Arkenstone, and Thor proclaimed it to be the king's jewel. Everyone paid homage to him, including King Thranduil. This caused Thor to slowly be consumed by greed and driven crazy. Sometime later, the dragon Smaug attacked Dale, killing thousands of people and bringing all the buildings down with his mighty fire. Those who managed to run away from the dragon's flames would still be killed by the falling structures, leaving very few survivors. Smaug's main interest was the dwarves' gold, so he attacked Erebor next. The king's grandson Thor and gathered the troops, and they rushed to the front gate while Thor took the Arkenstone to hide. However, the dwarves could do nothing against Smaug's power, who burst through the gate with open fire, bringing down several walls and hitting the troops with his huge claws. Soon Smaug took over the treasure room, and the shaking made Thor drop the Arkenstone, which got lost in the gold. Thor wanted to go after it, but Thorin pulled him away from another Smaug attack. Erebor was lost and the dwarves were forced to run away. On their way out, they found Thranduil and his army of elves, so Thorin asked for help, but Thranduil ignored him. Afterward, Thorin took work in villages of men to survive, but he never forgot what happened. Many years later, a hobbit named Bilbo is living a quiet life in the Shire. One day he's approached by the wizard Gandalf, who says he's looking for someone to share an adventure with. Bilbo remembers the fireworks Gandalf used to make during a neighbor's parties, but he's not interested in adventures and runs to hide in his house. Gandalf still draws a rune on Bilbo's door. That night, Bilbo is ready to have his peaceful dinner when someone appears at his door. It's a dwarf, who comes in and starts eating his dinner. Soon another dwarf also shows up, followed by a pair of twins. In the end, Gandalf arrives with a whole group of dwarves, who take over Bilbo's house and eat everything in the pantry. Bilbo is worried about the possible destruction of all his cutlery and plates, but the dwarves wash everything when they're done. At that moment, Thorin arrives and strangely calls Bilbo a burglar. While he eats, he tells the others that he held a meeting with the other dwarf lords, but they refuse to join his quest. Gandalf brings out a map of the Lonely Mountain, and the dwarves explain Smaug hasn't been seen in 60 years, so they want to reclaim their land. Thorin's father gave Gandalf a key to a hidden door mentioned in the map, which means they have a chance to sneak inside, but they need to decipher the strange text. A burglar is needed too, and Bilbo realizes Gandalf told the dwarves that he is one. He denies it, and the dwarves are also skeptical, so Gandalf uses his great presence to shut everyone up. The wizard points out that, thanks to their light feet, hobbits can pass unseen, plus Smaug won't recognize the smell. The dwarves trust Gandalf and hand Bilbo a contract, only for him to pass out when he reads about all the potential death situations. After he recovers, Gandalf reminds him there's more to life than dishes and doilies, but Bilbo still refuses. The next morning, Bilbo finds the dwarves gone and his house clean. The contract is still on the table, so he grabs it and runs out of the house, announcing to his neighbors that he's going on an adventure. Thankfully, he manages to catch up to the dwarves outside the Shire, and he's immediately put on a pony. After many hours of riding, the group camps for the night. Bilbo can't sleep because some of the dwarves snore, so one of them shares a story. After the dwarves left the Lonely Mountain, King Thor tried to reclaim the ancient dwarf kingdom of Moria. However, the place had already been invaded by orcs led by Azog. A fierce battle ensued, and while the dwarves tried their best to go against the orcs, Azog beheaded through her. Thorin's father, the prince, disappeared during the battle, and the dwarves thought they would lose without a leader, but Thorin stepped in. Azog quickly disarmed him, so Thorin grabbed an oaken branch to use as a shield. After stopping all of Azog's attacks with the branch, Thorin managed to retrieve a sword, and he cut Azog's arm off. Then Thorin led the dwarves on a stronger counterattack that helped them win the battle. Unfortunately, they lost too many warriors in the process and they weren't able to get the orcs out of Moria. Thorin thinks Azog is dead, but the storyteller and Gandalf don't agree. Not far from their camp, a group of orcs spies on Bilbo's group. Meanwhile, the wizard Radagast is currently panicking in his forest because he's found a strange sickness infecting both the plants and the wildlife. He takes a sick hedgehog into his home, but none of his tricks or medicine heal it, which makes Radagast realize dark magic is causing this. The hedgehog dies as black shadows surround the house, but Radagast rushes to put a bottle in the little guy's mouth and uses a spell to remove the darkness. Once the shadows disappear and the hedgehog gets better, Radagast checks outside and discovers giant spiders have invaded the forest. A bird informs him that this darkness is coming from an old fortress, so Radagast heads there on a sleigh. Many days later, the dwarves stop to rest near the ruins of a farm that makes Gandalf suspicious. He thinks they should head to the valley instead, but Thorin refuses to go anywhere near else, so an annoyed Gandalf leaves for a while. That night, Bilbo and the twins discover 2 ponies are missing. They also notice something big has uprooted some trees. Suddenly they see a light nearby and they quickly hide as they learn that mountain trolls are taking their ponies. The twins send Bilbo to the rescue, so the hobbit carefully sneaks around while the trolls argue and get dinner ready. When he gets to the ponies, he can't undo the ropes, so he tries to steal the troll's blade. Unfortunately, the troll reaches for his handkerchief and grabs Bilbo at the same time, then he blows his nose all over him. Once the troll notices Bilbo, he's startled and drops him. Bilbo tries to run away, however the trolls surround him and pick him up. At that moment the dwarves rush in and start fighting the trolls, using their teamwork to bring one of them to his knees. This distraction allows Bilbo to grab the blade and cut the ropes, so the ponies get to escape. Unfortunately, the trolls hear the ponies running away and immediately capture Bilbo, threatening to kill him if the dwarves don't surrender. The group drops their weapons and soon they're tied up to be cooked. At that moment, Bilbo notices Gandalf running nearby, so he starts distracting the trolls by discussing the best ways to cook dwarves and events, saying they have parasites. The trolls argue over what to do until Gandalf appears and breaks a rock to allow sunlight to reach the trolls. This causes them to quickly turn into stone. After freeing the dwarves, Gandalf gets worried because orcs usually don't come this far south. Then the group searches the trolls' cave and finds lots of treasure along with some elven swords. While the dwarves bury the treasure for later, Gandalf finds a shorter blade and gives it to Bilbo, explaining it'll glow blue when orcs or goblins are nearby. Suddenly they hear a noise and everyone gets ready to fight, but it's just Radagast. He tells Gandalf what happened in the forest and how he explored the fortress, which isn't abandoned anymore. When he searched the area, he felt a very dark power that could summon the spirits of the dead. A spirit appeared around Radagast and tried to kill him, so he had to fight it and make it disappear with his staff. Then he saw a mysterious necromancer hiding in the shadows, so Radagast ran away in panic while escaping from creepy bats. To prove the story, Radagast gives Gandalf the blade used by the spirit. The moment is interrupted by the attack of wolf-like creatures known as wargs. The dwarves quickly bring both beasts down, but they also point out these were scout wargs sent by orcs. Radagast volunteers as a distraction and gets on his sleigh, riding away at great speed, so the warg-riding orcs start following him instead. Once the coast is clear, Gandalf's group starts running on foot because the ponies are gone. They have to be careful to hide behind rocks so the orcs won't see them while they continue to go after Radagast. One of the orcs does manage to smell the dwarves and start searching for them, so the dwarves shoot an arrow to bring the warg down. Then they surround the orc to kill him with their axes. The screams of the dying orc echo in the area, so the other orcs forget about Radagast and follow the noise. Gandalf guides the group through the valley as fast as possible, however the orcs are quicker and soon surround them. The dwarves get ready to fight, but at that moment Gandalf reveals a hidden tunnel under a big stone. The group immediately rushes down the tunnel and the orcs try to follow them, only for a bunch of elves to show up and quickly kill all the beasts in mere seconds. An orc body falls into the tunnel and Thorin recognizes the arrow as elven, which irritates him. The group continues to follow the tunnel that leads them right into the elven state of Rivendell. A frustrated Thorin accuses Gandalf of having planned this all along. Gandalf still forces the group to advance to the palace's entrance, where they're surrounded by the returning elves and Lord Elrond, who also thinks it's strange for orcs to reach this area. Elrond meets Thorin with no ill and invites everyone to dinner. After everyone is well fed, Gandalf forces a stubborn Thorin to show the map to Elrond, who reveals it uses moon runes. They can only be read by the same moon as the day on which they were written, which luckily is happening right now. Elrond takes the map outside and lets the moonlight shine it, causing words to appear. It says that the last light of Durin's day will shine on the grey stone to reveal a keyhole. Elrond realizes the dwarves want to enter the mountain and says it's a very bad idea. Meanwhile, a few orcs have managed to escape and report to Azog, who is still alive after all. Hearing about his troops' failure, Azog kills the orc and then sends the others to spread the word. There's a reward for the dwarves' heads. Back to Gandalf, Elrond takes him to see Lady Galadriel and the wizard Saruman, who are worried about the possible consequences of Thorin's quest. Gandalf explains darkness is rising and it'd be better to kill Smaug now before he joins the enemy. He mentions the orcs and trolls, but Elrond and Saruman don't think that's enough proof of any darkness returning. Galadriel senses something and telepathically asks Gandalf to reveal it, so he brings out the spirit sword to prove Radagast's story. Galadriel and Elrond are terrified, however Saruman dismisses it as a common sword and is more worried about the dwarves' plan. At that moment an elf comes in to announce the dwarves are gone, which Gandalf had told them to do in advance. For the next few days, the dwarves climb across the valley and climb over the misty mountains. As they cross the high pass they're hit by heavy rain and Bilbo slips, but the dwarves save him just in time. They try to look for shelter when suddenly a huge rock flies above them and crashes against the mountain. Then they notice that there are two stone giants throwing rocks at each other, which is causing lots of damage to the area. Suddenly the ground opens and the group is split in two as it's revealed they're standing on the knees of another giant, who immediately gets headbutt. The three giants fight each other while the group does their best to hold on, but when two knees crash together, half of the dwarves think the other half got crushed or fell to their deaths. Luckily they took cover just in time, although Bilbo is barely holding on to the edge. The others bring him up and Thorin almost falls too by helping him. After he's brought up too, Thorin says Bilbo should have stayed home because he's been useless. While Azog and his orcs track the group's smell, the dwarves enter a cave to spend the night. Once everyone is asleep, Bilbo decides he's had enough and tries to leave. When a dwarf tries to stop him, Bilbo snaps at him, unaware Thorin is hearing everything. Bilbo gets ready to leave, but at that moment his sword begins glowing blue. Suddenly the ground cracks open and the group falls through the hole, revealing this cavern is actually a trap set up by the goblins. After falling for several minutes, the group lands on a metal structure and quickly gets surrounded by goblins. The dwarves try defending themselves, but the goblins greatly outnumber them and drag them away. In the chaos, the goblins don't notice Bilbo, who crouches and is left behind. With his glowing sword out, he searches the area and is jumped on by a goblin, so Bilbo tries his best to defend himself with his lack of proper training. The goblin surprises him from behind and bites him, so Bilbo pushes and they both end up falling into a dark chasm. Meanwhile the dwarves are taken to see the Goblin King, who tells his servant to send a message to Azog. On the bottom of the chasm, Bilbo wakes up and watches a strange being known as Gollum jump on the goblin. While they fight, Gollum accidentally drops a ring. He eventually knocks the goblin out and takes him away to eat him. Then Bilbo comes out of hiding and retrieves his sword. He also picks up the ring. He follows the noise of Gollum's voice and his sword stops glowing when Gollum kills the goblin. Gollum still hears Bilbo and appears in front of him, but he steps back when Bilbo threatens him with a sword. While Gollum keeps talking to himself about eating a hobbit, Bilbo asks for a way out. He swears he isn't playing any games, but Gollum gets excited anyway, so he shares a riddle that Bilbo easily answers. Seeing an opportunity, Bilbo offers a deal: they shall play a game of riddles. If Bilbo wins, Gollum has to show him the way out. If Gollum wins, he gets to eat Bilbo. They start exchanging traditional riddles, and they both sometimes it takes them a while to get the answer. Gollum is getting frustrated and grabs a rock, ready to attack if necessary. Suddenly Bilbo asks what is in his pocket and Gollum offers different answers, but he can't guess and Bilbo announces he wins. A furious Gollum gets ready to attack, however he loses his mind when he notices he's missing the ring. He searches the area until he realizes Bilbo has it and throws a rock at him. Bilbo runs through the tunnels to get away as Gollum chases after him. When Bilbo tries to escape through a narrow crack, he ends up getting stuck. After some struggle, his vest buttons fall off and Bilbo gets to move, falling on his back. The movement sends the ring flying and it lands on Bilbo's finger, making him invisible. When Gollum also crosses the narrow passage, he can't find Bilbo anymore. In the main cavern, the goblins find Thorin's sword and become disgusted because that's the legendary goblin cleaver that killed thousands of goblins in the past. They decide not to wait for Azog and kill the dwarves now. A fight begins and Thorin is pinned down, but when they're about to cut off his head, a very bright light shines in the cave and throws all the goblins off. It's Gandalf, who tells the dwarves to grab their weapons and fight. He also joins the battle and decapitates an enemy. Soon tons of goblins are being killed or thrown off the platform, including the king himself. As soon as there's an opening, Gandalf and the dwarves escape by running through the bridges. With a big stick, they push off the goblins that try to block their way, while others just get stabbed with swords. When a bunch of goblins try to reach them by jumping on ropes, the dwarves cut off one of the bridges to make it fall on them. They also use a ladder to push off more goblins and cross over a hole in the bridge. One of the bridges is swinging from side to side, so they have to make a dangerous jump to make it to the other end. As they keep on running, Gandalf uses his magic to make a rock fall and the dwarves push it to crush the goblins ahead of them. Suddenly the Goblin King bursts through a bridge and makes big threats, only for Gandalf to kill him in just a few strikes of a sword. The king falls and the bridge breaks, sliding down the cavern with the whole group on top of it. They land on the bottom of a tunnel and the king's body falls on top of them. Noticing a huge horde of goblins coming, Gandalf quickly makes the dwarves take the tunnel to get away. As they walk by, they're seen by Bilbo, but the group doesn't see him back because he's still invisible. Gollum hides behind a rock and Bilbo considers killing him, but he takes pity on him and instead jumps over Gollum to escape. Meanwhile, Gandalf and the dwarves leave the cavern and make it to a safe spot in the woods. They finally notice Bilbo isn't around and Thorin accuses him of having abandoned them, which is overheard by an arriving Bilbo. Determined to prove himself, Bilbo takes off the ring and appears in front of them. He admits he does miss his home, but the real bad thing is that the dwarves don't have one and he wants to help them recover it. At that moment they hear howling, which announces the arrival of Azog and wargs. The group starts running and a warg attacks Bilbo, but he quickly uses his sword to stab the beast in the head. A few more wargs soon follow and the dwarves kill them as quickly as possible. Then they keep running only to find themselves on the edge of a cliff, so they have no choice but to climb on the trees to avoid the incoming wargs. Gandalf sees a butterfly and sends it away with a special message. Azog and his orcs arrive and order the wargs to get the dwarves off the trees. The wargs start jumping like crazy, shaking the trees and breaking the branches. Immediately the trees start falling, so the group starts jumping from tree to tree until they're all together on the last standing one. To buy time, Gandalf lights a bunch of pine cones on fire and they start throwing them at the wargs to keep them back. Unfortunately, the tree falls anyway and the group is left hanging over the edge. Thorin decides to fight Azog, who quickly brings him down with just a few hits. Then his warg bites Thorin before throwing him off. Another orc gets ready to decapitate him, but suddenly Bilbo tackles him down and kills him with his sword while Thorin falls unconscious. When the other orcs get ready to attack Bilbo, some of the dwarves rush in to fight as well. A fierce battle begins, however there are too many orcs and the dwarves don't stand a chance. At that moment the butterfly returns with the attack the enemy, throwing them off the cliff and bringing down more trees. When there's an opening, they pick up all then dwarves, Gandalf, and Bilbo, and fly them to safety. A few hours later, the eagles drop everyone on an area close to the lonely mountain. Gandalf uses his magic to wake up Thorin, who immediately hugs Bilbo as he admits he was wrong about him. While the group gets ready to keep on traveling, Smaug awakes under all the gold. Moments later the group continues their journey, unaware that they're being followed by a group of bear-like creature nearby. Gandalf makes the group run through a field and a forest to reach a house. The bear beast is also coming, so they struggle with the door until they get it open and rush inside right as the beast try to follow them, but luckily they manage to lock the door before anyone gets hurt. Gandalf explains that Bear is the owner of the house, who can change forms. The group spends the night there and Azog decides not to attack because the bear is keeping guard. He plans to ambush the dwarves on the road, however an orc arrives announcing their master has summoned them. The orcs travel to an abandoned fortress where a mysterious necromancer tells Azog he needs him to lead his arm in the incoming war. Azog is still obsessed with getting revenge on Thorin, so he sends Balg after the dwarves instead. The next morning Beren takes on his human form and shares his food with the group. He tells them all their travel options are dangerous because orcs are growing in numbers and a darkness is approaching. Beren admits that he hates dwarves, but he hates orcs even more, so he agrees to escort them to the forest. After a few hours of riding, the group makes it to the edge of the forest and the Elven Gate. The forest feels sick, but this is their only way to get to the mountain on time. Gandalf approaches the statue of an elven queen and finds a red eye painted on it while remembering he's been told that darkness is coming back. At the same time, Bilbo sends a weird sensation coming from his ring. Deciding this is too dangerous to ignore, Gandalf leaves the group to investigate after reminding them not to leave the path because the forest can play tricks with their minds. The group spends several hours crossing the forest and the air is starting to affect them. Eventually they lose the road and end up next to a chasm, so they have to go back to look for their path again. Soon they're completely lost. They start going in circles and having hallucinations to the point that Bilbo is seeing himself. Suddenly the dwarves start arguing, but Thorin makes them shut up when he realizes someone is watching them. Meanwhile Bilbo starts climbing the trees until his head is poking out of the forest, allowing the clean air and bright sunlight to clear his mind. The dwarves don't answer him and he gets worried when he sees something moving under the treetops. Bilbo goes down and trips on cobweb, causing him to start falling. He grabs a branch to hold on, however this is the leg of a giant spider so Bilbo lets go and falls on more cobweb. The spider goes after him and quickly captures him. Then the spider tries dragging him to its nest, but Bilbo reacts fast and stabs it with his sword before throwing it off the tree. He removes all the cobweb from his body as he looks around, discovering all the dwarves have been captured. Bilbo puts on the ring to become invisible and now he can understand the language of the spiders, who are discussing how to eat the dwarves. He throws a rock to make some noise and most of the spiders run to investigate, but one stays behind to eat. Using his sword, Bilbo starts attacking the spider until it falls dead. Then he frees all the dwarves from the cobweb. Suddenly another spider jumps on Bilbo and he kills it too, but the body pushes him down and causes him to drop the ring. More spiders keep coming and the dwarves start fighting them with their swords and axes. They also kill one by pulling all its legs at the same time. Bilbo searches the ground for the ring and finds it near a strange but peaceful creature, yet he brutally kills it anyway. Then he retrieves the ring, only to realize what it made him do. The dwarves continue to fight the spiders and kill a bunch of them, however the beasts keep coming. Suddenly the elven prince Legolas jumps in, killing a few spiders before blocking the dwarves' path and surrounding them with his own guards. The dwarf Kili has accidentally been separated from the group and the spiders are about to get him. However, Teriel jumps in too and quickly kills all the spiders to rescue him. Afterward, the elves take all the dwarves' weapons and drag them away to their palace, while an invisible Bilbo follows them in silence. Most of the dwarves are locked up in cells and Kili tries to flirt with Teriel, who isn't impressed. Thorin is taken to see King Thranduil, who offers to release the dwarves and help them with their quest, but in return he wants the elven jewels that he gave to the dwarves many years ago. A furious Thorin snaps, reminding Thranduil that they didn't get help when they asked for it after the dragon attacked. However, Thranduil is angry too and reveals he uses illusion magic to hide a burn on his face caused by dragon fire. He thinks the dwarves' greed and gold hoarding was what summoned the dragon, so he sends Thorin to the cells too. Moments later, Teriel checks on the dwarves and chats with Kili, which gets them to bond. Meanwhile, Blog and the orcs sneak around the palace, trying to find a way in. At the same time, Bilbo looks around and overhears the elves talking about empty barrels that need to be thrown out. Once the coast is clear, he steals the cell keys from the hangar and releases all the dwarves. Next, he takes them to the cellars and makes them hide inside the empty barrels. Bilbo opens a hatch on the ground, which drops the barrels into the river. As the elves discover their prisoners have escaped, Bilbo uses his own weight on the end of the hatch to open it again and fall in the water. The barrels push the group down the river, and as soon as Legolas notices, he orders his warriors to close the gates. The dwarves get stuck at the closed gates, but before the guards can capture them, Blog and the orcs attack, killing the gate elves. Then the orcs land on the water, so Bilbo stabs one and the dwarves fight the others. Seeing the lever nearby, Kili jumps out of the barrel and uses a dead orc's sword to fight the opponents that try to block his way. He manages to kill a few, but when he gets to the lever, Blog lands an arrow on his leg. At that moment, Teriel shows up and fights the orcs approaching Kili, quickly killing them all. Legolas also arrives with a bunch of soldiers, so a fight between orcs and elves begins with the elves gaining a clear advantage. While everyone is distracted, Kili opens the gate and the barrels get to move downstream again. Kili gets to jump back with them while Bilbo holds on to a barrel to be dragged along. The orcs follow them on land, shooting arrows at them as they pass. Sometimes they try jumping as well, but the dwarves manage to fight them off. At the gates, Teriel and Legolas keep on killing orcs until they have an opening to join the chase. The elven warriors follow them and start bringing down the orcs currently going after the dwarves. Thorin throws a weapon at an orc on a branch to kill it and get another weapon in return, which they use on the orcs getting too close. The more orcs they kill, the more weapons they gather to defend themselves. They also cut a log that the orcs are using as a bridge, making them fall. One of the barrels suddenly makes a jump over another log and goes rolling down on land, crushing a bunch of orcs before breaking. The dwarf inside takes the chance to fight as well, killing a few enemies before jumping back into the water. Legolas decides to use the dwarves' heads to stand in the river as he keeps on shooting arrows at the orcs. He also uses an orc as a sleigh when he jumps back on land. An orc almost gets Legolas from behind, however Thorin throws an axe and kills the creature first. The barrels manage to float away to safety while another orc also tries attacking Legolas, only for Teriel to jump on it and capture it. Meanwhile, Gandalf is on a path around a mountain and almost falls on the broken steps, but he quickly recovers and enters a narrow opening. There he slips and falls, managing to stop right before he falls into an abyss. Then he lights up his staff and enters an old tomb, finding it open. Gandalf is startled by a bat only to discover a fellow wizard also came. They conclude that the empty tomb means an ancient enemy is coming back and dark magic is slowly spreading, so war is coming. Eventually the dwarves make it to a shore, where a man named Bard starts shooting arrows at them. Noticing he comes from Lake Town, the human settlement near the Lonely Mountain, the dwarves pretend to be merchants and ask him for help. Bard explains people only get to enter Lake Town if the master allows them, so the dwarves offer to pay double for Bard to smuggle them in. Meanwhile, the elves interrogate the orc, who reveals Kili has been hit with a poisoned arrow and will die soon. Teriel gets angry and tries to kill the orc, but Thranduil stops her and makes her leave the room. The orc starts explaining its master is gaining power and war is coming, so Thranduil kills it. Then he orders the guards to double the watch on their borders, forbidding everyone from leaving or entering. When Legolas approaches the gate guards, he learns that Teriel left and decides to go after her. Moments later, Bard's boat arrives at Lake Town and he makes the dwarves hide in the barrels. Then he makes a deal with a fisherman to transport his fish, which he uses to fill the barrels and keep the dwarves hidden. At the front gate, Bard presents his papers only for the town master's assistant to stop him. He points out Bard had permission to bring barrels but not food, so he makes his men throw the fish into the water. Before the dwarves can be seen, Bard points out food is scarce and this could result in riots, so he's allowed to pass. Afterward, the assistant reports this to the master of Lake Town, who takes Bard's words as a sign of rebellion and sends orders to arrest him. As he delivers the fish, Bard pays the fisherman to keep him silent about the dwarves. While Bard takes the dwarves through town, his son appears and tells him their house is being watched. Minutes later, Bard and his son arrive at their home, where Bard can tell who the guards are and tells them he's done for the day. After reuniting with his family, Bard lets the dwarves into his home through the toilet. While the group takes a moment to dry up, Thorin notices a dwarvish windlance on top of a building and Bilbo asks for its story. When the dragon attacked the town many years ago, the lord of the city gathered his warriors and make them shoot arrows. However, a dragon's hide is too tough to get damage like that. Only a black arrow fried from a windlance could kill a dragon and the lord tried using them, but his shot sadly missed. Bard's son corrects the story, saying the lord did land an arrow and loosened a scale, but the dwarves think that's a fairy tale. Then Bard takes the few weapons he's hidden in the water and offers them to the dwarves, who aren't happy about the bad quality. Bard explains good weapons are kept in the armory and points out the dwarves can't leave until nightfall because of the spies all over town. When Bard overhears Thorin's name, he rushes out of the house and enters a shop to check on an old tapestry that shows Thorin's family tree. Rumors of dwarves in town are already spreading and the locals discuss an old prophecy that talked of a dwarf bringing riches from the mountain. However, Bard remembers that the prophecy also said the town would burn. When Bard returns to his house, the dwarves are already gone. The group sneaks around and jumps through a window to get into the armory, where they find tons of good weapons. However, Kili's wound causes him to fall and the noise alerts the guards, who quickly surround them and arrest them. Afterward, they're taken to the master's house while the whole town watches. Thorin explains he's the last royal member of the kingdom under the Lonely Mountain and promises to reclaim the treasure so Lake Town can be a bright city again. Suddenly, Bard arrives and reminds everyone of the rest of the prophecy. However, the master points out it was Bard's ancestor who failed to kill the dragon. Excited by the idea of hold, the master welcomes the dwarves with open arms. In the morning, the group gets ready to leave with new weapons and armor. Thorin tells Kili to stay because of his wound, and 3 dwarves also stay to help him. At that moment, Kili passes out and Bard agrees to take the 4 dwarves in. Meanwhile, Gandalf makes it to the abandoned fortress and uses a powerful spell, trying to get the hidden devil to reveal itself. After a few tries, he exposes some orcs in Azog, who immediately knocks the wizard down. Gandalf quickly recovers and uses his magic to keep the orcs back while demanding to see their master. When he looks down, he notices dozens of orcs and their beasts entering the building. With no chance to win, Gandalf makes his bright staff blind everyone and starts running away. The orcs try coming after him, so Gandalf destroys the front entrance and the bridge to block the way, killing a few orcs with a debris. Then he keeps running, only to find a cloud of dark magic. Gandalf tries protecting himself with his light, but the dark magic is too powerful and breaks the bridge before destroying Gandalf's light shield. A figure covered in flames appears in the darkness to burn Gandalf's staff and throw him against the building, which starts to crumble. Minutes later, Gandalf is imprisoned in a cage and watches Azog's troops march towards the mountain. Back to the dwarves, they make it to the mountain and spend hours searching for the hidden door until Bilbo finds some steps on the side of a statue. They make their way up and find the door, yet they can find no hole for the key. The last light of the day is supposed to reveal it, but the sun is setting, so the desperate dwarves start hitting the door with their axes to no avail. When the sun finishes setting, the dwarves give up and leave after dropping the key. Bilbo stays back to think a little longer and realizes the last light actually means moonlight, which soon reveals the keyhole on the wall. While yelling at the dwarves to come back, Bilbo searches for the key and almost makes it fall, but Thorin arrives to grab it just in time. Then Thorin uses it to finally open the door, and the dwarves get emotional as they finally enter their old home again. An inscription on the wall shows the throne with the legendary Arkenstone, and since Bilbo is their assigned burglar, he's in charge of finding it. Bilbo wanders around until he makes it to the room with a treasure hoard. He begins looking for the Arkenstone and picks up a cup, which causes coins to fall over and reveal the dragon's mouth. Seeing the beast waking up, Bilbo puts on the ring, however Smaug can still smell someone in the room. Bilbo starts running away and hides behind a column until Smaug senses the ring and makes it react. A terrified Bilbo takes the ring off and says he didn't come to steal, he only came to see how amazing Smaug was. At that moment he notices the Arkenstone nearby, so he keeps talking to keep the Smaug distracted, but the dragon can tell he's lying and that there are dwarves in the area. Smaug stops around chasing after Bilbo, causing the Arkenstone to fall further down and the whole mountain to shake. The small earthquake also reaches Lake Town and Bard reveals he has one last black arrow left. He and his son sneak out of the house to try to reach the Windlands, but the guards see them and start chasing after them. Bard gives his son the arrow and tells him to hide it while he goes back to fight the guards. The boy hides the arrow in a boat and Bard manages to knock down a few men before he runs away by jumping on various boats. When he reaches land again, the assistant makes him trip and the master knocks him out before throwing him in jail. Meanwhile Balg and his orcs arrive in the town by jumping on roofs and they see the dwarf Bofur going around collecting herbs for Keely's wound. They attack Bofur and Bard's home at the same time, so the dwarves try their best to protect Bard's family. Bofur is quickly knocked down, but before the orc kills him, it's shot down by an elven arrow. Suddenly Tauriel and Legolas enter the house and start killing orcs without mercy. The dwarves also help, even Keely, although he's still in great pain. An orc runs out to inform Balg that Thorin is gone and Balg orders everyone to retreat. Legolas immediately goes after them while Tauriel stays to heal Kiri since Bofur finally returns with the herbs. As she applies an elven treatment, Kiri sees her in a new light and admits his feelings for her. On the edge of town, Legolas catches up with the orcs and kills a bunch of them. Azog sends most of the survivors away and stays to fight Legolas, who is ambushed by two hiding orcs. Legolas easily kills them before dueling Azog. They start with blades only to get disarmed and change to hand, both of them using the buildings to as each other. Two more orcs appear to distract Legolas, who quickly fights them and kills them before getting on his horse to chase after escaping Azog. In the mountain, Bilbo continues to run around trying to get the Arkenstone, but Smaug keeps on kicking it out of the way. Suddenly Bilbo looks up and notices Smaug is missing a scale, so the arrow story is true. Once Bilbo gets close enough to the stone, Smaug gets ready to breathe fire on him. However, Bilbo puts on the ring and runs out of the way just in time. At that moment Thorin arrives looking for Bilbo and immediately gets sick with greed. Bilbo tries to tell him they must run, but Thorin keeps him back as Smaug sees them at the same time the other dwarves come in, so they have to jump on the gold to dodge the incoming flames. Thorin still gets some fire on his back, but he just rolls to put it off. Bilbo and the dwarves sneak around the abandoned kingdom while Smaug keeps on looking for them. They make their way to the guard room, only to find the way out blocked and the bodies of all the fallen soldiers. Refusing to die like this, Thorin comes up with a plan. The group splits and some of the dwarves get Smaug's attention. To make him follow them to the forges, always making sure to dodge the flames. The team ends falling in the carts, so Smaug goes into another room and breathes fire again, forcing Thorin down a shaft. He holds on a rope and another dwarf cuts the counterweight rope to send him back up. Smaug tries biting him, however a bunch of debris falls and sends him to the bottom of the shaft. Thankfully, Thorin manages to get out right before fire is shot again. Then the group runs to the forges and realizes they'll need fire for them. Thorin begins insulting Smaug before taking cover, letting the incoming flames light up the forges. While Smaug repeatedly hits the gate to bring it down, the dwarves work together to mix an explosive powder. Once Smaug comes in, Bilbo pulls a lever to drop water on him to stop the fire. The dwarves then begin throwing the powder at the dragon to keep him distracted while the gold melts. The powder doesn't do much damage and Smaug starts destroying the room, causing the dwarves to fall from the carts. Thorin uses a cart to surf on the Gold River and reach the main hall. At the same time Bilbo makes Smaug follow him into that hall, where Thorin pulls a chain to open an old statue mold. Smaug is mesmerized by the gold inside, which suddenly bursts and covers the whole dragon. Unfortunately, this still isn't hot enough to hurt him, so a furious Smaug swears revenge and flies out to attack Lake Town. Soon everyone is panicking and getting ready to evacuate. The town master is making his men carry all his riches through a hidden tunnel so he can escape without confronting the townspeople. Bard is still in jail while Tauriel convinces for dwarves and Bard's family to get on a boat. Smaug flies above the town and begins attacking the city with its fire, burning people and buildings alike. The master's boat is moving too slowly because of the gold, so he pushes off his assistant Alfred to go faster. At that moment Bard finds some rope and throws it through the bars to tie it to the boat and the master himself. The other end is tied to the door, which the boat's pole rips off. Now Bard can escape. While Smaug continues to burn the town down, Bard rushes to his house to get his bow. Then he starts jumping on the roofs until he makes it to the bell tower, where he starts shooting arrows at Smaug. However, dragon hide is too strong to be pierced normally. Bard's son remembers he hit a special black arrow earlier, so he gets off the boat to retrieve and take it to his father. At that moment Smaug breaks the top of the tower and leaves the boy hanging on the edge. Bard quickly pulls him up only to discover his bow is broken. Thankfully, he improvises by sticking the ends of the bow in the building and putting the arrow on his son's shoulder. Then Bard notices an open spot from a fallen scale on Smaug's hide, so he shoots the arrow right into that hole. This greatly hurts Smaug, who brings the tower down as he falls. After destroying more buildings he tries flying up, but he finally dies and falls on top of the master. On the lonely mountain, Bilbo and the dwarves notice the death of the dragon, so Prince Thorin decides to enter the mountain to reclaim the kingdom of Erebor. In the morning, the survivors gather at the shore of the lake. The dwarves get a boat to join the others at the mountain and Kili asks Tauriel to come with him because he loves her. They are interrupted by the arrival of Prince Legolas, who reminds her they need to get going. Before they do so, Kili gives Tauriel his dead mother's runestone. Since the master is dead, Alfred tries to become the new leader and gets aggressive when the survivors don't obey him. Suddenly he's stopped by Bard, who throws him off before reuniting with his family. The townspeople celebrate Bard's achievement and Alfred cuts in to call him King Bard, but the survivors furiously turn against him. Bard stops them and reminds them to work together to find shelter before winter comes. A couple of days later, Kili and the other dwarves arrive at the lonely mountain, only to find Bilbo with a warning. He explains Thorin has barely been eating and sleeping and that this place has made him crazily sick with greed. The group rushes to the treasure room and watches Thorin constantly admiring the gold while talking to himself. Afterward, Thorin makes everyone search for the legendary Arkansas among all the treasure. However, Bilbo finds a private place to reveal he has the stone, which he took before running from Smaug. In the meantime, the news of Smaug's death reach Azog and his army of orcs, who are marching toward the mountain. Immediately Legolas gets a message from his father asking him to go back, but Tauriel has been banished. Legolas refuses to go home without her, and instead he and Toriel leave to investigate the situation with the orcs. In the abandoned fortress, the wizard Gandalf has been captured and tries to use magic to contact a friend. An orc throws his cage on the ground and tries to kill him, but at that moment Galadriel appears and kills him first with her mighty power. As she carries Gandalf's body out, evil spirits surround them. Thankfully Galadriel hasn't come alone. The elf Elrond and the wizard Saruman are also here and start fighting the spirits. With a fierce battle happening around them, Galadriel kisses Gandalf's forehead to wake him up. Then the wizard Radagast also arrives and takes Gandalf away on his sleigh. As Galadriel gets weak because of the evil presence, Elrond and Saruman gain the upper hand and finish the spirits off. At that moment the red eye of an ancient necromancer appears and announces the end of various kingdoms as he resummons the spirits. Then Galadriel rises and uses the power of a file to send the enemies back into a void before collapsing. Love Middle-earth? Subscribe for more epic story breakdowns. Dragon Sparkles.